So let's play with an erodible tip and see what it's capable of. Let me go ahead and create a new transparent background. And we'll start with the obvious. We'll play with it and see what it does. Starting with the brush tip shape, we'll make sure that we've selected an erodible brush, which is a erodible brush tip, which is just any of the ones that look like a pencil. Now, what is an erodible? Things like Conte crayon, things like charcoal, pastels, graphite pencils, lead pencils, graphite sticks, all of these, chalk, all of these would be considered an erodible in that as you work with them, they start to wear down. So you'll see a lot of artists will rotate their erodible materials, their mediums, as they work because they can get different shapes and tips. It's really fun to watch them and see how they handle it. So to begin with, let's just start with the mouse, and we'll see what happens when we click using just the erodible square. Now you notice we have something called softness, which can go from 0 to 100%. We have the standard size, which is of course the size of the tip of the brush. We also have spacing, which is, just like everything else. And we'll get into how this interacts with the texture of the brush as well. Erodables are really where texture shines. So let's start with having a softness of 0 and see what happens when we click and move around. So as I press against it, nothing seems to happen. Let's see what happens if I use a softness of 100. Again, it seems as though nothing is occurring, nothing is happening. But let's see what happens if we go to the brush pose and now change how this brush works. And you can see as I click on it, we can get different rotated views so we can get an idea of what we're looking at. Oh my. And with that, just changing the pose, I've taken a chunk of the erodible off. More and more of it disappears, and it's changing the shape of the entire brush altogether. So let's go ahead and just tip it a little bit and erode that away. Look how fast that disappeared. Let's go back real quick and take another look at the brush tip and knock the softness back to 0. Sure enough, now we're not having any form of erosion. In that case, coming back to brush pose, what happens if we tip it back? Well, take a look at the preview. You can see that now we're getting a very thin line. Even though this square, if you squint at it, it's very small on the screen. We're seeing a square shape, but it's only producing a little tip. Well, looking up in the left corner, we can see that when I press, the tip is going down into the surface, and that's it. That's as far as it goes. So we can get an idea that the erodible brush is going to be very effective with the pen tool. Why is that? Well, let me show you. I'm going to disable brush pose, which will just knock it back to the default position, but you can see that the removal remains. We've carved this down. Let me grab my Wacom pen. And now, as I change how I'm tipping the erodible material, I'm getting a thicker or thinner line from just the tilt. And that's because we've changed the shape. I think that the brush preview, which again is located down in this corner next to the new brush preset option, is very important for this because it allows us to actually see how we're holding our material and what it looks like. If you've stored one of these and you come back to it, you may not remember what it is, even if you were descriptive. Let's say that we've stored this, for example, and we call this angled, eroded, oh, I mistyped that a lot, close enough, brush. And we'll go ahead and not capture the size or the tool settings, which again are the other options. We don't want the color either. We're just going to load in a brush down here. And you can see that we have an angled eroded brush. So if we use something else like our texture brush for a while, and then we came back to our eroded brush, that may not be very useful as an example. The stroke's certainly nice, but the preview helps an awful lot when trying to determine what we've done in the past. So this leads to some more questions. Coming back to brush tip, you'll notice that after we've carved this away, it's no longer on the square, it's now on the custom shape. So here is a question. If we were to crank up the softness, and now that we've saved the brush, if we grind this away, we're back to a square, right? What if we sharpen the tip? It returns to the brush shape we saved. And this is very important for the erodible brush. Once we've saved this brush, we have the capability of returning to that shape that we meticulously carved out using the brush pose. That means after we have saved the brush, we have the ability to reduce the softness, or even before we save the brush, we can reduce the softness so long as we save it. And then using the custom shape, we can sharpen the tip back up to whatever we had. Now, I'm going to give you a warning here. I'm going to click it again. Watch that pop back. I'm going to give you a warning here. On some versions of Photoshop, you're going to have to choose from the drop-down custom shape yourself. So if you start with an erodible flat-tipped brush and you carve it away using the brush pose, and you come back to the brush tip shape, and you think, once I save it, this will be sufficient. On some versions of Photoshop, it won't necessarily do that. Notice, actually, perhaps this one, the erodible flat has remained the case. We come over to tip. Well, part of that, I believe, in this case is we tipped it. Good. So if we were to come back and sharpen it, you can see it does not sharpen back to the saved brush. We need to come back over, click the erodible flat, and you'll see that it's returned to the original. And now the custom shape is available. So what's changed here is by loading the brush rather than continuing to work on it, this version of Photoshop, and I'm using CC 2019, knows to switch to custom. Some versions are still going to get confused, and the safest thing to do is start with a shape that you want. Go to your brush pose, carefully carve away until you get that exact shape that you know will work beautifully on your system. And then back under brush tip shape, choose custom. At that point, you can save it, store it, and then when you resharpen the edge, as long as it's still on custom, it will resharpen to the saved one. Now, I believe on this version, it's going to mess it up. I think the last one did for sure. No, this version's fixed that. So in some versions, it will get confused on the custom. So here's what I recommend, because you're probably sitting there going, well, what am I supposed to do? That's a lot of information here. What's the right way to do it? My recommendation is this. Start with a shape that you want, such as the erodible point. Go to the pose, change the pose as you need to, carve away by clicking, making sure that you have a softness at a point that will wear it away at a rate that you're comfortable with. Keeping in mind, the higher the rate, the faster it will erode. And at 0, it won't erode at all. Change it to custom, then save it. Once you've saved it, don't keep working. Come back to brushes, click on it again to load it back in, and you'll see that it has custom. By going through those steps, erode away, say custom, save, it will make sure that it pops back to it regardless of what version you have. I think 2014 had the most problems, but they had 2014.1 like long ago, so you're probably going to be okay. The other thing that I forgot to do, it doesn't hurt to take brush pose off before you save it. That way you can use the rotation of your pen and not have any overriding processes, there we are, going on. I'm actually using the Wacom right now, but it's not rotating it simply because I can't. I've locked it up and I have overrides on. So don't do what I did. Make sure you remove it. So I'm going to walk through making one from start to finish now. I will simply select an erodible brush. I will, from the erodible, choose a shape that I want. And I can toggle through to see what shapes are available. I'm going to ignore that transparent line. That's a glitch in 2019. You may not have that, hopefully. I'm going to see what round looks like. That looks good. I'll see what square looks like. Makes sense. I'll see what triangle looks like. I'm going to work with round this time. I will start with the round. I will make sure that it's soft enough that I can erode it. I will come over to brush pose, I will adjust the pose until I'm happy with the point that it will erode. And then I will click with my mouse and drag around until I'm happy with the amount that it's eroded. If it's eroded too quickly, I will turn down the softness, making it harder so it will erode slower. Like so. Then I can go back to brush pose, tilt again as necessary. Remembering I can also rotate, which is quite useful. And then squeak, 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 squeak. Just like you'd sharpen a pencil on a piece of sandpaper to get an ultrafine point. I'm just rubbing it away. Rotate some more and get this corner a bit. Okay, let's say I'm happy with this. Before I save it, I will uncheck brush pose. I will go to brush tip. I will set the softness to something that I think I'll like. I can always adjust this later and save a new version. I will change the shape to custom. Make sure I'm happy with the spacing. I'm going to say 2% should be good for this brush. Now notice I'm not clicking and testing this just yet. That would be for another round. I could sharpen the tip back to this point with custom shape, which means that I could in fact test it. And if I'm happy with it, sharpen back, and I will be back at my custom shape that I've carefully eroded away, and not the round one, if my version of Photoshop's working correctly. Let's take a look. If it's not, then clicking custom shape at that point will erase it. Oh, so heads up on version 2019, it will erase it. So let's be overly cautious. I'm going to go ahead and resculpt it one more time. Once I'm happy with it, come back to brush tip shape. I'm not going to mess with the softness or shading just yet. I'll deal with that later. I will set it to custom. I will save it, and I'll put needs adjustments. I'm going to do it in 2 steps. I'm going to go to the brush. I'm going to load up need adjustments. Come back to brush settings. Wow, this is a lot of work, right? Okay. And then I'm going to check my spacing till I get a spacing I like. And then I'm going to check my softness until I get an erosion that I like. And I can resharpen it now because I've saved and clicked on the brush. That's too soft. I want it harder so that it will take a moment to grind down. Yeah, more like that. Okay, once I'm happy with it, save it again. I'm just using the create new brush. You can use the flyout menu. And I will call this, let's say, oh, wait, before I do save it again, I'll make sure that I've sharpened the tip back to the way it's supposed to be so I don't overwrite it. I've created the spacing. Okay. Heads up too, sometimes it will glitch if you hit sharpen tip before you've saved it. It will think that there are no new adjustments, even though I did change spacing. So I'm going to go ahead and save it again. Now I'm going to give it a name. Nice erode, whatever. And voila, we have it stored. Now I don't want to mix it up with needs adjustments, so I'm going to click on needs adjustments and throw it away with the tiny trash can. I'm of course in the brush menu. And there we go. Now I have the nice erode, which will behave as I want. Except, wouldn't this be better with texture? Because one of the nice things about chalk is the granularity of the material you're drawing on. So right now, as you can see, I can always sharpen the tip back to the carefully carved version that I created, but I want more. So in the next video, we're going to explore texture with erodible brushes. And I think you're really going to enjoy this. Okay, see you in a minute.